Welcome back, everybody, to another deep dive with us.
Glad to be back.
So today, we're really excited to get into a book that I think a lot of our listeners are familiar with.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
It's The Bootstrapper's Bible by Seth Godin.
A classic.
It is a classic, and it's interesting because it's not one of those giant, business strategy books.
Right.
It's actually quite short. It's like a manifesto almost.
Yeah, it's more about mindset than like step by step.
Yeah.
Here's your business plan sort of thing.
Exactly. And that's kind of what we're going to be diving into today is that mindset. And like you said, it's full of kind of these actionable pieces of advice and these really inspiring anecdotes.
Yeah, he has a really good way of using examples that kind of stick with you.
Yeah,
They're very memorable and they really drive home the points.
for sure. So our mission today is to equip our listeners with that same kind of bootstrapper mindset and also some of the practical tactics they can use to launch and grow a successful business.
Right, because you don't need a ton of resources to start something amazing.
Absolutely. So let's start with that idea of the bootstrapper mindset. Because I think there's often a misconception that bootstrapping means you're broke or you're, scraping by.
Yeah, that's not what it's about at all.
So how does Godin define a bootstrapper?
He really emphasizes that it's a state of mind. It's about being resourceful and scrappy and making the most of what you have. It's about being willing to roll up your sleeves and get your hands dirty.
I love that. It's that DIY spirit, right? Like you're not afraid to figure things out as you go.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And he actually lays out this Bootstrapper's manifesto in the book, and it's full of these powerful statements that kind of embody that mindset.
Oh, yeah. I remember that. What were some of the lines that stood out to you?
One that always sticks with me is, I am fearless.
Okay, so not reckless.
Right. It's not about being careless or taking unnecessary risks.
Yeah.
It's about not letting fear paralyze you.
Mm.
It's about being willing to step outside of your comfort zone and take calculated risks.
I think that's so important for any entrepreneur, whether they're bootstrapping or not.
Absolutely. Fear can be a real killer of dreams.
For sure. So tell me about this story of Michael Joaquin Gray and Matthew Brown. They created this toy called Zubrite.
Yeah, they're a great example of the bootstrapper mindset in action.
What did they do?
So they had this really cool toy that was starting to gain some traction. And they got this amazing opportunity to tie in with the Lost World movie, which was huge at the time.
Okay, so a massive marketing opportunity.
Yeah, they could have made a fortune. But they turned it down
They turned it down. Why would they do that?
because they were concerned about protecting their brand's identity. They didn't want to be seen as just another movie tie-in toy.
Yeah.
They had a bigger vision for their product.
Wow, that's such a bold move, especially when you're just starting out and probably could use the cash.
Right. It shows you the long-term thinking that a lot of bootstrappers have. They're not just chasing quick wins. They're building something sustainable and authentic.
I think that's really inspiring. Okay, so we've talked about the mindset, but let's be realistic here. How do you actually compete when you're up against companies with millions of dollars in funding and huge marketing budgets?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
And Godin doesn't sugarcoat it. He's very clear about the advantages that big companies have.
Like what?
They have established distribution channels so they can get their products in front of more people. They have access to capital so they can invest in research and development and marketing.
Right, and they probably have pretty good brand recognition already.
Exactly. They've already built relationships with customers, and they can attract top talent because they can offer competitive salaries and benefits.
So it sounds like we're fighting an uphill battle here.
It can feel that way if you try to compete head-on in those areas.
So what's the secret sauce? How do bootstrappers actually make it work?
Well, Godin argues that bootstrappers have their own set of advantages.
Okay, I'm all ears. Let's hear it.
He lists 7 key advantages that I think are worth exploring in detail.
All right, let's dive into those.
The first one might seem a little counterintuitive. Bootstrappers have nothing to lose.
Huh, what does that mean?
Think about it. Big companies are often afraid to take risks. They have a lot to lose if they fail. But bootstrappers don't have that same burden. They can be more nimble and experiment with new ideas.
So they're more willing to rock the boat.
Exactly. They can move faster and be more innovative because they're not bogged down by layers of bureaucracy.
Like a speedboat weaving through a harbor filled with giant tankers.
Yeah, that's a great analogy. So do you want a real-world example of this nothing-to-lose advantage?
I'm always up for a good story. Hit me with it.
Okay, so think about ad software. The company behind the game, Doom. They were a small team with a really groundbreaking idea.
Team was huge, yeah.
Massive. And they did something really bold. They gave the game away for free online.
Wait, what? They gave their product away for free.
They did. It was a calculated risk, but it paid off big time.
How so?
By giving away the basic version of the game, they created massive buzz and built a huge following.
So they got people hooked.
Exactly. And then they offered a deluxe version for sale, and it was a massive hit.
Wow, so they actually turned their nothing-to-lose situation into a huge win.
Exactly. And they disrupted the entire gaming industry in the process.
That's a pretty inspiring story. Okay, so that's advantage number one. What's the second advantage that bootstrappers have?
The second advantage is that they're often happy with smaller wins.
Okay, so explain that one to me.
A big company like Disney needs a blockbuster movie to move the needle on their bottom line.
Right, they need those massive revenue streams.
But a bootstrapper can succeed with a niche product and a smaller, dedicated customer base.
So it's about setting realistic expectations and celebrating those milestones along the way.
Exactly. You're not playing the same game as the big companies. You're running your own race.
I like that. Okay, advantage number three.
The third advantage is something Godin calls presidential input.
Presidential input. Okay, now I'm really intrigued.
He uses this funny anecdote about an airline gate agent to illustrate the point.
Okay, let's hear it.
So you're at the gate, and your flight is delayed. And you're trying to get information from the gate agent. But they have no idea what's going on. They have to call someone else who has to call someone else.
And you're stuck in this bureaucratic loop.
Exactly. And that's what happens in a lot of big organizations. Decisions are made by people who are far removed from the customer.
Right. There's all those layers of management.
But a bootstrapper, as the president of their own company, has a direct line to their customers.
So they can respond more quickly to feedback and make changes on the fly.
Exactly. They're more agile and adaptable, which can be a huge advantage in a rapidly changing market.
Okay, presidential input. I like it. What about advantage number four?
Number 4 is rapid R&D.
Research and development. Okay, so explain how bootstrappers have an advantage there.
It goes back to that idea of agility. Smaller, more focused teams can move faster and be more innovative than large bureaucratic organizations.
Think back to IID Software and Doom.
Right? They were a small team, but they were able to create something truly groundbreaking because they weren't bogged down by layers of management and slow decision-making processes.
So it's about being able to iterate and experiment quickly.
Exactly. And that speed can be a real competitive advantage.
Okay, we're on a roll here. What's advantage number 5?
It's the underdog factor.
The underdog factor. Interesting.
People root for the little guy, right?
I know, I do. I'm much more likely to support a local artisan than a giant corporation.
Exactly. And that underdog status can actually translate into real business advantages.
How so?
Well, for one thing, people are often more willing to give you a chance to cut you a break if you're the underdog.
You get more sympathy.
Exactly. You might be able to negotiate better deals with vendors, get more support from customers, and even attract talented people who want to be part of something with a mission.
So it's not just about warm and fuzzy feelings. It can actually impact your bottom line.
Absolutely. Okay, ready for advantage number 6.
Hit me with it.
Low overhead.
That one's pretty self-explanatory.
It is. Bootstrappers can often outcompete on price because they don't have the same massive expenses as big companies.
Right, they're not paying for fancy offices or huge marketing campaigns.
Exactly. And that can give them a real edge in the market.
Especially in those early days when every dollar counts.
Absolutely. Okay, one more to go.
All right, bring it home.
Yeah.
What's the 7th and final advantage that bootstrappers have?
Time.
Time. Okay, I'm not sure I follow you on that one.
Bootstrappers can often be more patient. They can play the long game. They're not under the same pressure to deliver quarterly earnings reports or meet shareholder demands.
So they can focus on building something sustainable and lasting.
Exactly. They can make decisions that are in the best interest of the business, even if it means sacrificing short-term profits.
Okay, I'm starting to see how all of these advantages can really add up. Okay, so we've talked about the bootstrapper mindset and the unique advantages that bootstrappers have. But I think the next big question is, how do you choose the right business model when you're bootstrapping?
That's a crucial question. And Godin really emphasizes that choosing the right business model is actually more important than having a great idea.
Really? More important than the idea itself?
He says that a great idea with a bad business model is going to fail.
Okay, yeah.
He uses this example of an entrepreneur installing payphones in Somalia today.
Payphones in Somalia. Okay, that's an interesting
It
one.
might sound like a great idea on the surface, but it's not going to work because the business model is fundamentally flawed.
Right, the market just isn't there.
Exactly. So what makes a good business model? Godin says it needs to be profitable, of course, but it also needs to be protectable. self-priming, adjustable, and optionally have an exit strategy.
Okay, hold on. Let's break that down a bit. What does he mean by self-priming?
Think about it like a snowball rolling down a hill.
Okay, I'm visualizing.
As it rolls, it picks up more snow and gets bigger and bigger.
Right, it gains momentum.
Exactly. And a self-priming business model does the same thing with customers and revenue.
So it's not just about making a profit. It's about building a system that generates its own growth.
Exactly. And Godin actually uses this example of a fictional ice cream sandwich business to illustrate how a business model can evolve and scale over time.
Oh, yeah, I remember that one. He starts with this really simple operation, right?
Exactly. Just a guy making ice cream sandwiches in his kitchen and selling them at a local park.
But then he starts to systematize the process.
Right. He finds ways to increase production, improve distribution, and eventually even franchise the business.
And all along the way, he's making adjustments to the business model to adapt to the changing market.
Exactly. And that's why that adjustability piece is so important.
Okay, so that's the ice cream sandwich success story. What about an example of a business model that didn't work so well?
He talks about this office supply reseller who thought he had a great idea.
What was his plan?
He was just going to buy office supplies in bulk and resell them at a markup.
Sounds pretty straightforward.
It does. But he didn't really consider the long-term viability of the model.
What went wrong?
Well, for one thing, he was competing with giants like Amazon and Staples.
Tough competition.
And he wasn't really adding any value or differentiation. He was just reselling at a markup.
So he was easily replaceable.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's why it's so important to think critically about your business model before you jump in.
Okay, so we've talked about the importance of choosing the right business model. But what about the actual process of getting started? Where do you even begin when you're bootstrapping?
Godin talks about this concept of the value chain, which is essentially a map of every step a product or service goes through before it reaches the customer.
Okay, I think I'm following you. So it's like understanding the entire journey of your product from raw materials to the hands of the consumer.
Exactly. And he says that analyzing the value chain is crucial for bootstrappers because it helps you identify where the real value is being created and captured.
So it's not just about making a product. It's about understanding the entire ecosystem around that product.
Exactly. And he suggests asking yourself 4 key questions.
All right, lay those questions on me.
The first question is, who's going to buy your product or service? You need to clearly define your target market.
Makes sense. You need to know who you're selling to.
The second question is, how much will they pay? You need to understand your customer's willingness to pay so you can price your product appropriately.
Right. You don't want to price yourself out of market.
The third question is, where will they find it? This is all about distribution and making sure your product is available where your customers are looking for it.
So it's about being strategic with your sales channels.
Exactly. And the final question is, what's the cost of making one sale?
Mm.
You need to understand your costs inside and out so you can determine your profit margins.
Right. You got to make sure you're actually making money.
Exactly. And Gova uses some really great examples to illustrate these points, like the Pet Rock.
Oh, yeah. The Pet Rock classic example of a simple product that was marketed brilliantly.
Exactly. And 3M's Post-it notes.
Another seemingly simple product that became a global phenomenon.
And both of these examples highlight the importance of understanding the value chain and being strategic about distribution.
Right. You can have the greatest product in the world, but if you can't get it in front of the right people, it's not going to matter.
Exactly. And that's why Godin emphasizes the power of controlling the last step in the value chain.
Which is?
Selling directly to the consumer whenever possible.
Okay. I can see how that would be advantageous. You cut out the middleman and capture more of the profit margin.
Exactly.
Okay.
And you build a direct relationship with your customer, which can be invaluable for a bootstrapper.
Absolutely. Okay, so let's say I've got my business model figured out. I understand the value chain. I'm ready to launch. But here's the big question. How do I get started when I'm bootstrapping and funding is tight?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
It is. And I think a lot of people get stuck at this stage. They think they need to raise a ton of money before they can even get started.
Right. But Godin has a different perspective.
I'm all ears. What's his advice?
He says you need to find people who care about cash less than you do.
Okay, now I'm intrigued. Who are these magical people who don't care about money?
Think about your suppliers and your customers.
Okay, so not investors.
Right. Your suppliers want to see you succeed because your growth is their growth. So you can often negotiate favorable payment terms with them. Maybe you can get extended payment terms or even consignment deals.
So you're using their resources to fuel your own growth?
Exactly. And then they're your customers.
Okay, what about them?
Well, if you're providing a valuable product or service, They might be willing to pay upfront or make a deposit.
So you're essentially getting them to fund your early growth.
Exactly. It's about being creative and finding those win-win situations.
I love that. It's about thinking outside the box and leveraging the resources that are already available to you.
Exactly. And, sometimes you can even start small while you're still working your day job.
Right, you don't necessarily have to quit your job and go all in right away.
Exactly. You can start building your business on the side, testing your ideas and gaining some traction before you make that leap.
Okay, so I'm hearing a lot of emphasis on being resourceful and scrappy.
Absolutely. That's the heart of the bootstrapper mindset.
And what about the financial side of things? What are some key things to keep in mind when you're bootstrapping?
Well, first and foremost, you need to be meticulous about tracking your cash flow.
So no burying your head in the sand when it comes to the numbers.
Definitely not.
Yeah.
You need to know where every dollar is going, and you need to be able to make adjustments quickly if you're starting to run low on cash.
So it's all about being proactive and staying on top of your finances.
Exactly. And Godin also cautions against the dangers of debt.
Right? Debt can be a slippery slope.
It can be. He says that you should only use debt strategically when you have a clear plan for how you're going to repay it and when the return on investment is high.
So no borrowing money just to keep the lights on?
Exactly. Debt should be a tool, not a crutch.
Okay. I think we've laid a really solid foundation here for understanding the bootstrapper mindset and the challenges and opportunities that come with building a business from the ground up. But there's one big piece of the puzzle that we haven't talked about yet. Sales.
Ah, yes, sales.
Yeah.
The lifeblood of any business.
Exactly. And I think a lot of people, even seasoned entrepreneurs, get a little squeamish when it comes to selling.
It can be intimidating.
It can be, but Godin doesn't mince words. He says sales are the oxygen that keeps your business alive, especially when you're bootstrapping.
He's absolutely right.
Yeah.
You can have the greatest product or service in the world, but if you can't sell it, you're not going to be in business for very long.
So how does he approach the topic of sales?
Well, he uses these really interesting examples from different industries like the sneaker industry, life insurance, and even book publishing to illustrate his points.
Okay, those are some pretty diverse industries. I'm curious to hear how he ties them together.
He breaks down how each industry operates and shows where the real value is added.
And what's the common thread?
Controlling the sales process gives you control of your business.
Oh, I like that. So if you're relying on someone else to sell your product or service, you're essentially giving away a huge chunk of your power.
Exactly. And a big chunk of your potential profit.
So are you saying that every entrepreneur needs to be a charismatic sales superstar?
That's a great question. And Godin acknowledges that not everyone is a natural salesperson.
Thank goodness. Because I'm definitely more of the introverted behind-the-scenes type.
He says that you either need to become great at sales or find someone who can be.
So you can either develop those skills yourself or bring in someone who already has them.
Exactly. And he even goes as far as to say that if you're not comfortable with sales, bootstrapping might not be the right path for you.
Wow, that's pretty straightforward advice.
It is. But it's important to be honest with yourself. If you're not willing to sell your product or service, you're going to have a hard time building a successful business.
That's a really good point. Okay, so let's say we're ready to embrace the world of sales. What about building a support system? You can't do it all alone, right?
You definitely can't. And Godin talks about the importance of surrounding yourself with winners.
Winners. Okay, what does he mean by that?
He's talking about customers, employees, vendors, and even your peers. It's about building a network of people who believe in your vision and support your success.
So it's not just about finding people who are successful, it's about finding people who are aligned with your values and your goals.
Exactly. And he even talks about the importance of firing bad customers.
Firing customers. Now that's a new one.
He uses the example of Microsoft and how their demands can sometimes be detrimental to smaller businesses.
So it's about setting boundaries and protecting your business, even if it means losing some revenue in the short term.
Exactly. Not all customers are created equal.
I like that.
Okay.
What about employees?
He says that building a strong team is crucial for any bootstrapper, but he also emphasizes the importance of finding the right people.
Right. You don't want to just hire anyone who walks through the door.
He actually gives this really practical tip. Hire quickly, but have a 60-day trial period.
So it's like a test drive for a new hire.
Exactly. You want to make sure that they're a good fit for the culture and that they can actually deliver on their promises.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
What about vendors and partners?
Finding supportive vendors and strategic partners can be a game changer for a bootstrapper.
How so?
Well, they can provide you with access to resources and expertise that you might not have on your own.
So it's about leveraging those relationships to amplify your own strengths.
Exactly. It's like building your own personal Avengers team.
I love that analogy. Okay, let's move on to another topic that I think is particularly relevant for bootstrappers. Equity.
Ah, yes, equity.
Hmm.
The E word.
It can be a tricky topic to navigate, especially when you're building a business with partners.
It can be. And Godin uses this really clever analogy to illustrate the potential pitfalls of a 50-50 split.
Oh yeah, the Eiffel Tower analogy. I love that one.
So imagine you and your partner are standing at the base of the Eiffel Tower, and you both agree to meet in the middle.
Okay, so you're both walking towards each other.
Right. But the problem is that the Eiffel Tower isn't a straight line. It's a curve.
So if you both insist on meeting exactly in the middle, someone's going to end up dangling precariously off the edge.
Exactly. And that's what can happen with a 50-50 split. If you don't have a clear understanding of roles, responsibilities, and expectations from the very beginning, someone's going to end up feeling like they're getting the short end of the stick.
That's a great visual. So how do you avoid those pitfalls?
Godin outlines 5 key principles to consider when sharing ownership.
Okay, I'm ready to hear them. Hit me with those principles.
The first principle is to plan for success. You need to have a clear vision for where you want the business to go and how you're going to get there.
So don't just assume that everything's going to work out. You need to have a plan.
Exactly. The second principle is to remember that ideas are cheap. Execution is key.
So it's not enough to just have a good idea. You need to be able to actually bring it to life.
Exactly. The third principle is to have clear exit strategies. What happens if one of the partners wants to leave the business? Or if you get an offer to sell? You need to have a plan in place for those scenarios.
Right. You don't want to be caught off guard.
The fourth principle is to match compensation with performance. People should be rewarded for their contributions to the business.
So it's not just about splitting everything equally. It's about making sure that everyone is fairly compensated for their hard work.
Exactly. And the fifth and final principle is to separate profit participation from governance. Who has the authority to make decisions about the business? You need to be clear about that from the outset.
Right. You don't want to end up with a situation where one partner has all the power and the other partner is just along for a ride.
Exactly. Those are some really important considerations.
They are. And I think having those open and honest conversations about equity up front can save you a lot of heartache and headaches down the road.
Absolutely. It's better to address those issues head on than to let them fester and potentially destroy the business.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here, but I want to circle back to the topic of marketing because I know that Godin is a big believer in the power of advertising.
He is. He actually stresses that advertising is an investment, not an expense. And he says that you should prioritize it from day one, even if you're bootstrapping.
But he's not talking about just throwing money at random ads, right? What's his approach to advertising?
He shares 4 crucial rules for effective advertising.
All right, I'm ready to take notes. What are those rules?
Rule number 1, spend regularly. Don't just advertise sporadically. You need to be consistent with your marketing efforts.
So it's like a marathon, not a sprint.
Exactly. Rule number 2, be persistent.
Oh.
Don't give up too soon. It takes time to build awareness and trust with your target audience.
So don't get discouraged if you don't see results overnight.
Exactly. Rule number 3, be clear. Your message needs to be easy to understand, and it needs to resonate with your target audience.
So no jargon or confusing language?
Right? And rule number 4, test and measure relentlessly. You need to constantly track your results and make adjustments to your campaigns based on what's working and what's not.
So it's about being data-driven and constantly optimizing your approach.
Exactly. He even uses this fantastic story of Steve the toilet fixer to illustrate the power of persistence in advertising.
Oh, yeah, I remember that story. Steve was this guy who ran a small plumbing business, right?
He did.
Yeah.
And he ran the same simple ad in the local newspaper every week for years.
And it worked.
It did. Because he was consistent and he was providing a valuable service.
So it's not about being flashy or having the biggest budget. It's about being reliable and building trust with your customers.
Exactly. And that's something that any bootstrapper can do.
Okay, I think we're starting to get a really good handle on the principles of bootstrapping. But before we wrap up this part of our deep dive, I want to touch on one last topic that I find really intriguing: mentorship and partnerships.
Those are both incredibly valuable resources for any entrepreneur, especially when you're bootstrapping.
Absolutely. So what does Godin have to say about mentorship?
He encourages seeking out mentors, but he emphasizes that the right person might not be the most famous or successful person in your industry.
So it's not about finding the biggest name. It's about finding someone who can actually provide you with valuable guidance.
Exactly. And he actually outlines a simple two-step process for finding a mentor.
Oh, I like a good process. Let's hear it.
Step 1. Identify the right person based on their experience and expertise. Who do you admire? Who has achieved what you want to achieve?
Okay, so you're looking for someone who's been there and done that.
Exactly. And step 2. Make it easy for them to say yes or no to your request for mentorship.
So don't overthink it. Don't make it a big, scary ask.
Right. Just be clear about what you're looking for and see if they're willing to help.
Makes sense. Okay, what about partnerships?
Godin uses this interesting analogy to describe the types of partnerships that can be beneficial for bootstrappers. He calls them hippo partnerships.
Hippo partnerships. Okay, I've got to hear more about this one.
He uses the hippo to represent larger established companies.
Okay, I see where he's going with this.
Right.
So these are companies that might seem intimidating at first, but they can actually be valuable partners for a bootstrapper.
Exactly. They often have resources and credibility that you can tap into.
So it's about finding those win-win situations where the bootstrapper brings the agility and innovation and the hippo brings the resources and scale.
Exactly. It's like a symbiotic relationship.
Okay, can you give me some examples of these successful hippo partnerships?
Sure. There's this entrepreneur who revitalized the Western Electric brand.
Western Electric, those are the guys who used to make telephones, right?
They did. And this entrepreneur licensed the name from General Electric and acquired a defunct Western Electric factory.
So he was able to leverage the brand recognition and the existing infrastructure.
Exactly. It was a brilliant move. And it's a perfect example of how a bootstrapper can partner with a hippo to achieve their goals.
Okay, we're going to have to pause there for now. But we've covered a lot of ground here, from the bootstrapper mindset to those hippo partnerships. It's clear that the Bootstrapper's Bible is packed with valuable insights and practical advice for anyone who's looking to build a business from the ground up.
It is. And we're just getting started. We'll be back in a flash to continue our deep dive and share some more key takeaways from the book.
Stay tuned.
It's a real reminder that you don't have to start big to make a big impact.
That's so true. Okay, so we've talked about the mindset, the advantages, the business model, the value chain, even funding. We've covered a ton of ground here. But if someone is listening and thinking about starting their own business, what are the key takeaways from the Bootstrapper's Bible? What are the big things that they need to remember?
Well, Godin actually distills his wisdom into 9 key rules for bootstrapping success.
9 rules. Okay, I love a good framework. Let's hear them.
Rule number 1 is find people who care about cash less than you do.
Okay, that one's a little cryptic. Break that down for me.
It means thinking beyond traditional funding sources, like banks and venture capitalists.
Right, because those guys are all about the bottom line.
Exactly. So instead, Godin suggests looking to your suppliers and your customers.
Okay, interesting. So how do you get them to care less about cash than you do?
Well, with suppliers, you can often negotiate favorable payment terms. Maybe you can get extended payment terms or even consignment deals, where you only pay for the products after you've sold them.
So you're essentially using their resources to fuel your own growth?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And with customers, if you're providing a valuable product or service, they might be willing to pay up front or make a deposit.
Right, especially if they're eager to get their hands on what you're offering.
Exactly. So it's about being creative and finding those win-win situations where everyone benefits.
I love that approach. It's about collaboration, not just competition.
Exactly.
Well,
Okay, rule number 2 is be cheap.
be cheap. Okay, that one's pretty straightforward. But I think it's worth emphasizing because I know a lot of entrepreneurs, especially when they're starting out, want to make a big splash and, spend money on all the bells and whistles.
Right. But Godin's point is that when you're bootstrapping, every dollar counts.
Mm.
You need to be scrappy and resourceful and find ways to do things efficiently and affordably.
So it's about being mindful of your spending and prioritizing those expenses that are truly essential.
Exactly. Okay, rule number 3 is get a reputation for speed.
Speed. Interesting. So what does that mean in the context of bootstrapping?
It means being able to move quickly and adapt to changes in the market. Bootstrappers often have an advantage here because they're not bogged down by layers of bureaucracy.
Right. They can make decisions and execute on them much faster than a larger company.
Exactly. And that speed can be a real competitive advantage.
So it's about being agile and responsive.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay, rule number 4 is one that I think a lot of people struggle with. Redo your mission statement and business plan every 3 months.
Wow, every 3 months. That seems like a lot.
It is. But Godin's point is that the business landscape is constantly changing. What might have seemed like a great idea 3 months ago might not be so relevant today.
So it's about being willing to adapt and pivot as you learn more about your market and your customers?
Exactly. Don't be afraid to make changes to your plan if you need to. The key is to stay flexible and responsive.
I think that's such an important lesson for any entrepreneur. You have to be willing to evolve and adjust your course as you go.
Absolutely. Okay, rule number 5 is another one that we've touched on already. Associate with winners.
Right. The importance of surrounding yourself with the right people, customers, employees, vendors, mentors.
Exactly. And that also means having the courage to fire bad customers and let go of employees who aren't a good fit.
It's about protecting your business and your sanity.
Exactly. Okay, rule number 6 is guard your equity.
That's a big one.
Right.
We talked about that earlier with the Eiffel Tower analogy.
Right. Don't give away too much equity too early on. Make sure that you have a clear understanding of roles, responsibilities, and expectations with any partners.
And have those exit strategies in place just in case.
Exactly.
Okay.
Rule number 7 is advertise.
So he's a big believer in the power of marketing.
He is. He says that you should prioritize advertising from day one, even if you're on a tight budget.
But I think his approach to advertising is different from what a lot of people might expect.
How so?
Well, he emphasizes the importance of persistence and consistency. He says that you need to advertise regularly and stick with it, even if you don't see results right away.
He also talks about the importance of being clear and concise with your message and testing and measuring your results to see what's working and what's not.
So it's not just about throwing money at ads. It's about being strategic and thoughtful with your marketing efforts.
Exactly. Okay, rule number 8 is find and work with a mentor.
Mentorship can be so valuable for entrepreneurs, especially when you're just starting out and you're not sure which way to turn.
Exactly. And Godin says that the right mentor might not be the most famous or successful person in your industry.
So it's not about finding the biggest name. It's about finding someone who can actually provide you with valuable guidance and support.
Right. Someone who's been there and done that and who's willing to share their wisdom with you.
I think that's such an important distinction. Okay, and finally, rule number 9 is leverage the assets of a hippo. Ah, yes, the hippo partnerships.
Exactly. Godin encourages bootstrappers to partner with larger established companies to gain access to resources and credibility.
So it's about finding those win-win situations where the bootstrapper brings the agility and innovation and the hippo brings the resources and scale.
Exactly. And we talked about some examples of those successful hippo partnerships earlier.
Okay, so those are the 9 rules, a lot to think about, but I think they provide a really solid framework for anyone who's looking to bootstrap a business.
They do. And they really highlight the key principles of bootstrapping. Resourcefulness, creativity, persistence, and a willingness to think outside the box.
I like that. Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. But I'm curious, what are your final thoughts on the Bootstrapper's Bible? What's the one big takeaway that you want our listeners to walk away with?
It really is. It's about taking action and not letting fear hold you back.
So don't wait for the perfect moment or the perfect plan. Just get started.
Exactly. Perfection is the enemy of progress.
And there's another quote that I love. It's from Richard Branson. He said, "If somebody offers you an amazing opportunity, but you're not sure you can do it, say yes, then learn how to do it later."
That's so true. Sometimes you just have to take that leap of faith and trust that you'll figure it out along the way.
And I think that's what the Bootstrapper's Bible is all about. It's about empowering people to take control of their own destinies and build something amazing from the ground up.
It's about embracing that entrepreneurial spirit and not letting anything stand in your way.
You know, one thing that really struck me about the book was that it's about more than just building a business. It's about building a life on your own terms.
That's a great point. Bootstrapping is about freedom and flexibility. It's about being your own boss and calling the shots.
And it's about the satisfaction that comes from creating something from nothing.
Right. There's nothing quite like the feeling of seeing your vision come to life.
So for anyone listening who's feeling that entrepreneurial itch, but maybe feeling a little intimidated or overwhelmed, what's the one piece of advice from the Bootstrapper's Bible that you would leave them with?
Don't be afraid to start small. Don't wait until you have all the answers or all the resources. Just take that first step and start building. You'll be amazed at what you can accomplish.
That's such a powerful message, and I think it's the perfect note to end on. So thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the Bootstrapper's Bible.
It's been a pleasure. And I hope our listeners feel inspired and empowered to go out there and build their own dreams.
We'll be sure to include a link to Seth Godin's book in the show notes for anyone who wants to learn more.
And if you have any questions or comments, feel free to reach out to us on social media.
We love hearing from our listeners. Until next time, keep learning, keep exploring, and keep pushing the boundaries of what's possible.
And remember, The world needs more bootstrappers.
Ugh.
People who are willing to roll up their sleeves, get their hands dirty, and make things happen.
That's a wrap.